down and fall asleep. You know why? Because it was a 13-hour flight.
So we got to poke you, if that's the case.
Yeah. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. I don't think we've got any apologies. Let's just go here. So apologies are nil. Confirmation of the order of business. I don't think there's any changes to that. Has anyone got any changes to their interests?
No.
No. Okay. So what we'll do is use the hands up signal, or I mightn't see that. I'm happy if you just put your hand up and I'll make a note if you want to speak. But there's only 9 of us here, so that should work all right. So the next item is any conflicts of interest? No. No public forum because nobody is asked to speak, so that's nice and simple. Confirmation of the minutes of the 13th of May. So you all had a chance to read those. Would someone be happy to move that they're a true and correct record?
Happy to second.
All right. Well, the quickest two was Councillor McGurk moved and Councillor Skinner beat you just as seconder. So all those
fancy losing the race.
Yeah, fancy that, Trevor. So
Just
all those
just a wee note on that minutes. In the minutes, it was noted the carryover report will be available this meeting, but it is not. So this is just a little note on that previous meetings.
That'll come out through the meeting because it's in the manager's report that it's not quite ready. But I am told that they've made more progress in terms of projects. So we won't be as badly off as we were in the past. So with that note, I'll put that. So the minutes have been moved. All those in favour, please say aye or raise your hand, one or the other. 1, 2. What are you doing, Brian? Are you raising your hand or?
Oh, yeah, I've got a yes there as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's carried. Right. So Nathan, then we go to you to start your quarterly report. And if you want to go through it in topics, and then we can take questions and topics. How does that sound?
That sounds fine to me.
Yeah. Okay, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so I mean, the very overarching summary is things are running reasonably smoothly. We're reasonably comfortable with where we are. So that's the only thing that's gone sort of negative on us. We obviously had that theft that's been discussed in the report. We've got a project that isn't going as well as we'd hoped, which is the generator project. And the finances around the business unit at the moment have gone backwards a bit over the last month and a half or 2 months. Dry weather and specifically has influenced us. So, and Andrew can talk to that when we get to that point. In terms of health and safety, we had a number of minor incidents. We have been in discussion with the contractor about changing the notation, and that is underway. So instead of having a lot of incidents being registered, we're intending to have more opportunities for improvement as the contractor's notation that will go in there, which is essentially what I historically have considered as hazard identifications or those things. We're trying to focus in on things well in advance of them becoming an incident. So we've had that conversation about that in previous board meetings.
Yeah.
If there's any questions about any of the health and safety incidents, you're welcome to ask.
All right, so we'll take that now. I thought they looked pretty minor. I reread the report this morning, flying from Auckland to Nelson. And I must say, suddenly getting from 27 degrees to 8 at Nelson Airport was a shock to the system. So any questions in relation to the health and safety? Some of them look relatively minor. Although I did see one dent in a vehicle, didn't I?
Yes, that's correct. There was a vehicle incident.
Yeah. So any questions re health and safety from anyone?
No questions per se, but on the other hand, I mean, it's just something that we need to be pretty careful of.
Yep.
I agree, Councillor Tufnell, particularly with the environment that some of the staff and the contractors are working in. Accidents can become very serious incidents very quickly.
I have a couple of observations and recommendations as well.
Right, Talent?
Yeah.
To you.
I think it's a good point which Nathan has raised. We have to proactively identify those hazards, and that can only be done if we get from our maintenance and other contractors which are involved a report which shows that what they are proactively doing in order to prevent those incidents. I know that we traditionally get the report based on their historical performance, which is health and safety statistics, man hours worked, lost time injuries, recordable incidents, and etc. But we don't have visibility as to how many toolbox talks, how many training incidents, how many non-compliance reports they were issued internally and externally. And also we don't have visibility that our business units, project managers or operations managers are proactively doing a surprise visit or multiple surprise visits to site to see whether it is complied with or not. So this is something which I wanted to raise. The other thing is about that theft incident. I was wondering if our pump station and major facilities and asset sites are secured or not. I remember we had similar incident here in Christchurch, and we immediately reacted, and we had a drawdown project to improve the safety and security of our pump stations, whereby we installed the CCTVs and fencing as well. And also we improved the permit to work requirements as well, So these are two things. Thanks.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll get Nathan to reply to those two, and he has informally to me prior to the meeting. But I'd just like to add, Nathan, I noted that one about the bird watchers on cycles, and I'm just wondering, is there a standard operating procedure for them coming on the site? Because they're actually volunteers, aren't they? Or are there a group of people involved with probably the estuary restoration? Would that be correct?
Through the chair, in terms of the bird watchers, there has been a long-standing access to a sand island on the eastern side of Bell Island that has, where they come through the facility. And it has been there for many, many years. We've tried to change the processes over time, and we have a plan in place to put in a pathway or an access way around our operational facilities and a parking or a spot where they can access safely down the beach. We've been cognizant of a lot of these issues for a while, but we thought we were going to be doing it as part of another action, and it hasn't come forward. So we might need to speed up that process.
Yeah. All right.
In terms of the Tasman Environmental Trust, and there's a whole trapping program that goes on for predators on the island, principally to protect the birds on the eastern side of Bell Island, and those personnel on the island, and they come around our operational area. We have processes in place and work with them. Brad would have to speak to you specifically about any operating procedure for the bird watchers specifically. So, Brad, you may choose to comment on that.
Thanks, Nathan. Through the chair, I would actually have to go and have a look and talk to the operations contractor to understand that. Like Nathan said, it is a long-standing access arrangement that's been provided. In effect, we are doing nothing more than providing permission to traverse through our land to get to the sandbank. We were a little bit surprised that they decided to ride bikes, but they were told in no uncertain terms that it wasn't an appropriate mode of transport, especially across the causeway or up and down our access ways.
All right, we just need to make sure that we have that conversation. If you could make a note of that, Brad. So Nathan, if you want to answer Tallet's other questions, and I think you have brought them to me, you need to bring them to everyone else's attention.
Yeah, so we think that the theft on the Saxons Road site is sort of a little bit opportunistic. We think that because there's a deconstruction project going on next door of a big, large warehouse facility, they've had theft of some of the equipment out of that it's sort of meant that people have been focusing on our facility. As part of that, we know that they have actually gone into one of the cool stores and shut down the power and stripped out the cabling from that. So that's obviously raised a very significant concern to us that it might occur to our facility. In the past, we've had our facilities have been essentially underground with a secure building, and they haven't been fenced. Everything's been intended to be safe, but we haven't fenced them off. But we're in the process of now adding fencing to our sites, and we will put in some CCTV cameras at key sites, and potentially some sort of lighting that would allow us to, after hours, if someone comes on the site, it actually illuminates the site so that we can have good coverage of the site. So there's a bunch of things that we will do. We have fenced some of our sites already, but at the present time, I think this is basically showing us that we probably need to take one step forward and in terms of the security and safety on those sites.
Yep, that's good. And the other one was a record of, say, I think about toolbox meetings and that sort of thing.
So yes, through the chair, I think that's a very valid point. We've not chosen to escalate that to you at the board level at this time, but we can happily do so in future board reports. Those toolbox meetings and those interventions and conversations do occur, and I'm happy for them to be reported on in the board meetings. I have no reason why we wouldn't.
No. As long as if it's being recorded now, because I know that we record them at council. Good morning, Alec. Good to see you. But the board doesn't necessarily need to know the number, but they need to know that they're taking place, because ultimately, if something goes wrong, it comes back to us.
Yeah, through the chair, all of those actions are undertaken. I'm confident that the contractor has toolbox meetings. We actually have initiated a series of what we call tailgate meetings that are collaborative ones now between the NRSBU and the contractor. So because we are now cohabiting in the same office block on the Best Island site, there's a lot more positive interaction occurring with between the contractor, particularly at the management level. But we now have a meeting facility where they're doing tailgates at the same time. So that is starting to increase our communication profile as well as part of the cohabitation, which was intended as part of the new contract. So, yeah.
Okay, so that covers health and safety. So if we move on, Nathan.
In terms of activities that we're undertaking, there's been some good completions over the last since the last meeting. The sleeving of the pipe from the Turners and Growers site to Martin Point has been completed and signed off, so that's a great outcome. The Saxons Island air valve structure, which was damaged during Cyclone Gita, was finally repaired, and that's been completed. That was a great outcome. Good, and I'd like to thank the NCC Capital Works staff for helping us with that. Bevan Thompson and those guys managed that project with us, and it's very useful. We've got the consents in place now for our orphanage stream crossing. It's part of the relining, or the upgrade of the pipeline work as well. So that's another step forward. And we've also got the consents for the contaminated soil stuff for the contaminated sites for the same alignment. So those are all things that are steps in the way towards the next element of that project. So those are all being completed. So I'm pretty pleased about that. Projects that are underway, obviously we've got the Motoroa Rabbit Island resource consent for biocides application that we were going to have the hearing but it was delayed till the 2nd of August. So that's now on the 2nd of August. One of the commissioners was ill, unfortunately, so we didn't have it then. The emergency generator works is still underway, and that's a project that is causing us some concern. So I'll get Brad to talk to you about that now in terms of what's going on with that. So Brad.
Thanks, Nathan. Through the chair, the generators themselves are all procured. for this project. The bulk of them are in place. We've got the generator supply coming down in a couple of weeks' time to finish the remaining 2 generator placements off. The major issues we're running into with this project has been the connection of the generators to the control system and the pump stations. When this was originally designed, the feedback we had as part of the design report that it was a simple case of having a small ancillary connection to the control boards for the pump stations, which in effect allowed a larger generator incomer to be installed to supply the board. Our understanding, and we're still working to clarify this because it's fairly technical, in the time that transpired between that report being done and the project being commenced, there's been some legislative changes, which has basically meant that the boards in the pump stations are no longer able to be modified to accept the power supply coming from the new generators. It's requiring construction of effectively a new standalone control board, which manages all breakers, which manages all the MCCBs, the motorised control circuit breakers, the switching gear. In effect, I suppose you could say it's probably about 80 to 90% of what the current boards do. As part of that, we've gone and had some design pricing work done at Saxton Road Pump Station for the initial commencement for this. The board design that initially came back from that was absolutely massive. The board was somewhere in the vicinity of 6 metres long. Horrendously expensive indicative prices came in at almost $750,000 for that single board. We've gone back to our suppliers and said, well, hang on a second, there's got to be better ways of doing this. We've reviewed that the board size has come down significantly from there to around about 3.5 metres long. But as part of this works, and in conjunction with other projects that are happening at the pump stations, so things like changing the wet well control, wet well level control systems, which at the moment are very manual probe type systems, which are in the fluid and prone to ragging and failure. There's a considerable amount of work that would have had to have been done to the existing boards to allow that changeover to a modern radar level control system. And we also, in the last 2 weeks, received notification from some of our contractors that some of the other componentry in the pump station, so the RTU and the input-output modules, basically are now superseded. Whilst they continue to be supported for some time, we can no longer get them. And as soon as we upgrade one component, we run into compatibility issues with a number of other components. So that's triggered us to take a bit of a step back at this point, and actually review what we're doing with the control systems and the pump stations as a whole, noting that they are 10 to 15 years old, and you know, they are starting to get close to needing to be partially renewed for a lot of the componentry, or some of the componentry rather. And we're now actually looking at what the cost implications would be if we were to actually replace the entire control system as part of the generator works. There's significant efficiency in doing that. In effect, we go from a 3.5 metre board that's already required for the generators to one that's approximately 4.5 to 5 metres long, which incorporates the full control. One of the other things we're also considering at present is the fact that when we can do this in a progressive manner. So the structure of the existing boards that we have and a lot of the engineering inside the existing boards, so the wired connections are still fine. There's nothing wrong with them. So if we do this in a progressive manner, for example, if we were to put a complete new control board in at Saxton Pump Station, the existing control board at Saxton Pump Station could be removed, refurbished, brought up to the required standards and reused at another pump station for a significant saving on the cost of the new board. That is all very new information. It's just to come to light in the last couple of weeks. So we have our contractors and designers looking at this at the moment. We're working to come up with solutions that are going to present good value and also leave the pump stations reasonably well protected going forward. And the intention is to provide a separate report on this project for the next board meeting, which outlines what's happened so far, where the trigger points have been that have changed the plan, really changed the equipment that's required, and also the solutions that we've considered for the board to review and approve going forward.
Okay, so from my perspective, this is about us being resilient and having a backup system, but it needs to work. So I was going to say, I was thinking while you were speaking that we need a report for the next meeting, so you've actually preempted it. So has anyone else got any other questions of Brad in relation to this?
Yeah, I have a few questions on that. Talking about resilience in case of power or mechanical failures. So what are the arrangements on these two pump stations? Like, for instance, do we have standby pumps for mechanical failure? And do we have enough capacity in the wet wells so that the system can retain for certain hours? So that is something I need to ask. The other thing is for those two new generators. Normally what happens is if it is linked with the rating or power rating of the generator, it may need a discharge consent, especially for the air. And I'm not sure if it is considered or not, or if it is applicable or not in this case. Third thing is for the critical repairs, the suppliers, I presume that this has been identified and the supplier is supplying the list of and along with the critical spares to generator as well. Thanks.
Thanks. So through the chair, yes. So the pump stations at present all have a generator. The generator is unable for those pump stations to operate the storm pumps at full capacity. They can operate the storm pumps at a reduced speed, but generally we just consider that they can run the dry weather pumps. So that's the current scenario. So the project is not looking at 2 generators. It is looking at, I think there's about 6 different, all of the pump stations in effect either get a new generator or we're moving a generator from, for example, the Saxton pump station to one of the other pump stations. Large enough, because it is large enough, the one that exists to run the pumps at that pump station. Where we've run into issues is that the boards that are built there, the generator incomers on those boards were never big enough to handle a generator that could power the storm pumps at full capacity. So when we are running the generators, those storm pumps are restricted. So we do have resilience there at the moment, albeit not at full pump speed. The wet wells at these sites do have some storage. It would depend dramatically on the weather conditions and inflow. Realistically, storage could range anywhere from 20 minutes through to 3 or 4 hours.
Through the chair, one of our risks with our pumping facilities, we don't have sufficient backup storage or offline storage for our systems. We've recognised that. The normal practice is to have either 6 hours or 9 hours of dry weather storage in the region. That's Tasman District and Nelson City's different considerations under their local development guidelines. We do not have that in our system. Part of the actions that we have been considering over the last period of time is identifying whether we can put in some storage in the network, and we have been talking to some landowners about potentially acquiring some land alongside our facilities to do so. And secondly, we are duplicating the pipe work to give us significantly more resilience in the system, so that even if we had a failure in one of our pipes, we would still have capacity to handle half of our storm flow or in that sort of order. So we've gone down a slightly different pathway at the present time to try to maintain our levels of resilience, but storage in the facility is something that is going to be, it is in our forethoughts. We are trying to understand what we can do, but it is part of our long-term picture for the facility. In terms of the discharge to air situation, my understanding is, and I'll have to go back and check and confirm, but we aren't exposed to that until we get over a 2 megawatt engine in the rules and the air plan in Nelson. I can't recall. We would have looked at that when we did the changeover. And in terms of critical spares, I mean, we expect to have appropriate critical spares in the region for it. And one of the reasons we required our contractor, the supplier of the generators, to have a local agent who has actual physical capacity to maintain that device in our region. So we didn't go to suppliers who did not have that capacity. So,
thank you. Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for that response. And Brad, we'll look forward to your report at the next meeting in September. Nathan, I did note that you commented about the consent for the pipe across the estuary to Best Island. That consent, will that cover future capacity? Because you're initially talking about it for the golf course. Will we need a separate consent if we're going to do the other charge?
Yeah, so currently the intent, we've tried to keep the consenting process as simple as we possibly can for the golf course activity. So it's it only currently covers that. We, in order to get that to proceed quickly, we've basically put in essentially a carrier pipe which acts as a wheel stop alongside the causeway, so that if someone was to slide on the causeway, that essentially be stopped from going off the edge. And our water pipe for the Best Island golf course reuse would run through the wheel stop pipe so that it's protected from damage. But at the present time, we haven't been intending to dig that pipe under the estuary. For future upgrades, we would have to consider something that would potentially require us to pull the pipe under the estuary, and that was a much more difficult consenting exercise with iwi than in particular than the way we're proposing to do this one.
Yes, but a comment would be that the trade-off will be that we will reduce discharge to the estuary.
Absolutely. I through the chair, I totally agree with you. We were trying to be pragmatic in this situation with our current consent to get it to move quickly.
Yeah. So anything that we can do to reduce what goes to the estuary, even though it's treated, will be viewed, I believe, in a favourable way from our iwi partners. And that's something we just need to discuss with them and earlier rather than later.
Yes.
So, okay. All right. What next, Nathan?
So I was just going to comment. I did try and put a picture in here. It didn't come out well at all, sorry, of our pipework, the strategy sort of diagram. It's a bit of probably looks like a spaghetti junction in the agenda, and I'll try and make a better one for next time. But basically this schematic diagram is trying to show the regional pipework upgrade, including all of the different stages of it and future stages, along with our recycle and reuse pipework that's being installed at the same time. So when we put in place sections of pipe, we're basically augmenting the capacity. When we've got that hole open, we've been putting in a smaller pipe for the water reuse with the intent that if we can get high quality reuse water to the likes of Saxon's Field for use instead of having to use potable water, that would be a positive action. So that's this diagram. Apologies for the lack of clarity of it, and I'll try and make that better next time. Is intended to show that whole, the current steps and the future steps for the pipework. The key aspect is at the present time we have capacity for the next 15 years for our storm flow events, or that's our expectation with this current work that we're doing. After that, then we have options of upgrading some pumps or some additional pipework pressures that will give us another 5 or so years. And then after that, we will then have to look at a section of pipework from Tasman, from Richmond towards the west to come into the Bell Island on the opposite direction. So that's another piece. So this is trying to set out the pathway forward for our regional pumping network and its resilience, etc., over that 20-30 year period. So okay.
Having looked at that this morning, I did think to me that there was more resilience now when you look at the extra pipelines going in.
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, the resilience will occur once we get those pipelines hooked up, obviously, and that won't, the entirety of that network won't be hooked up until the back end of next calendar year, once we've got the connections over past the Heslops and across Saxon's Creek, where we were interacting with the Saxon Stage 4 upgrade. So,
yeah. Anyone else got any other comments on that diagram?
Yes, I have. I appreciate it's a good pictorial view of current and future works. I was wondering if this has been developed in conjunction with or by taking the input from a scheme-wide modeling, I believe, is it?
So the way the NRSBU interacts with its contributors is each year we ask our contributors for their current and future projected flows. We don't do the modelling ourselves. It's not the intent of the way the relationship between ourselves and our contributors is set up. And each year we write a request to our contributors. One of those contributors being Nelson, one of them being Tasman District, about what their future flows are. Tasman District have given us some fairly clear guidelines on what they want. We've been in conversation for some time with Nelson about their flows and loads. There's a bit more uncertainty around some of those, and there is uncertainty at the present time, in particular because the future development strategy for the region is still underway. And as soon as that gets sorted out, then we'll have more clarity around what those flows might do. The second element that's always a little bit unclear for us, and which we try and put some pressure back on our contributors, is what the inflow and infiltration amounts might be for their system. So I've previously talked about trying to limit the peaking elements around inflow and infiltration and say, well, 5 or 6 times the average dry weather flow. At the present time, we haven't got a clear guideline around what that an acceptable number would be, and that's something that we're trying to work on together with those contributors. And so overall, it's not a traditional, way that another council would work, because we essentially don't control the networks and those things. We basically are relying on our contributors to tell us what that future demand would be, and then once they've told us that, then we'll obviously have to go away and look at our network and then consider what upgrades we might need to do to accommodate that additional flow, if there is additional flow.
Both councils have a program, Nathan, in relation to reducing infiltration, and the newest suburb or subdivision in Tasman is a pressurised system. So those 1,400 houses in that lower Queen Street area don't get that infiltration. Yep. Whereas a new suburb that we've had in Mapua has not been the same.
So through the chair, I understand that, and one of the things that it's my duty to do is to continue to request that information from the councils. I'm not in, as NRSBU isn't in a position to influence that specifically, other than through our communication, and which is what we will continue to do. And hopefully we'll continue to get good information that will allow us to do good planning for the future. We have had issues in the past around whether or not the capacity at each pump station is well defined. So one of the problems with our trade waste agreements is that they aggregate the flow from our contributors. So if, as an example, Tasman District Council's looking for 800 litres a second capacity in the future. It's easy for them because they have one particular location for the bulk of that to come, it's the Beach Road pump station. Yeah. Whereas Nelson City, they've requested 605 litres per second from us, but what they have is 5 different pump stations that they contributed to. And from my perspective, in order to do good planning for future growth, I need to understand how much flow there is at each pump station rather than just the aggregated number at Beach Road. Aggregated number for all of them. So, and that's something that we are trying to deal with our contributors with. So, yeah.
Well, it's a question for Alec, really, is that until the FDS is approved, and there is significant changes in forms of future development there, isn't there, with the site behind Saxton Field coming into play. So that will change things, will it not, Alec?
Through the chair, yes, welcome back.
Yeah.
from your overseas trip, and sorry
Yep.
for my my lateness this morning, and things got
That's all right.
away from me. Yes, look, I mean, we're constantly working with Nathan and his team as with the Nelson City Council hat on, and as things progress and change in terms of FDS and a whole lot of other things, we will constantly give and work with Nathan to make sure that the information that he requests and that he wants is as accurate as possible. But we are working in a changing environment, and we are looking at it. We are looking at ahead, and this is exactly what Mike from a TDC position would be doing. You know, we live in a world where we have to. We don't have the benefit of a crystal ball, but we do have the benefit of FDSs and a whole lot of other strategies that we need to take into account, and that's part and parcel of what we do in terms of our 10-year plan and the information that we provide, Nathan. Yes.
Yeah, and the good thing about that is the FDS will be reviewed every 3 years. So in terms of information, we should, as councils, and I mean both councils, be able to provide that update on a more regular basis and provide trends. I would have thought that would help.
Through the chair, one of the things that we have been doing as NRSBU, and we've been working with NCC in particular on it, is actually developing additional data in and around all of the entirety of the catchment. So, you know, rather than worrying specifically about our piece of the catchment and the piece upstream, trying to understand peaking factors, diurnal flows, all of those things, and how they interact within our system, so that we can be more confident about the capacity in particular of the wastes that are coming to the system. So, yeah.
Good. All right. So I don't see any other questions. So is the next major subject finance?
That is correct, yes.
Oh, well, Andrew, you're going to be in the hot seat, and I'm sure both councils and Philip will have some questions for you.
Yes, can I talk briefly? So the finance has actually gone backward quite a bit over the last very short period. It was only over a very short thing from March to April, and the finances went back. And my summary of it is that we had a very dry period of time, so we had very low flows, so we didn't get as much flow, and therefore we're charging as much variable income. That's one aspect of it. But secondly, the same trends that were going on before, where our fixed charges were under recovering, that's continued to occur, and interest rates have also gone up during that period of time, which has meant that that our change, we've seen a change in the finance costs. So when I dug into the finances, it was basically clear that we've been stable in terms of the cost information over the last month. You know, we haven't gone backward further in terms of operations or consulting to any significant extent, but we have gone backwards against the financing and or recovery charges. The income. So that's the summary. Now Andrew can talk to you about the specifics of the impact of that, I think.
Andrew. You're muted, Andrew. Now you're right.
Thank you. The main thing I think that's important to Nathan's has summarised what's happened quite well. I think the thing about the variable contributions is they're only interim, and so because there has been dry weather charges come through, particularly in April and again in June, that we've got less income from mainly the two councils for their volume flows. So that's the main driver for that. Until we actually run everything through the recovery model, the expenses which node within the model they fall as to where the difference hits is quite complicated, and I'm loath to make a suggestion of what it might be without whole lots of caveats, which I did at the customer meeting earlier in the week. So I've talked to them about where I think it's going to end up, the wash up. The interest rates have doubled during the year. We borrow from the two councils, so whilst the cost might go up, their income goes up, but it goes up in a different bucket. For the two councils, we have recovered a lot more than budgeted in the septage area. The septage operation is effectively owned by the two councils. The recovery, the two councils pay through the wash-up mechanism for the half share of the treatment and conveyance of the septage, whereas the portion of the recovery that relates to the fixed charges for the use of capital, that flows through as to net income, which then goes to the two councils. So I think may seem to be a standalone from an operational point of view, and I suspect June will go back because of the loss of income. The total costs are over due to the additional maintenance work we've had to do in the new contract, but also the cost of the premium we've had to pay for consultants because of the lack of staffing. So overall, there will be we will have to recover those additional costs from the 5 major customers. Well, actually 4, because NZ's flows and loads have been very, very low and can be ignored, really. So that brings back to the 4 of us.
So through the chair, can I just summarise something just to try and clarify slightly? The way that the model that we charge on works is it's got 2 elements to it. It's got a fixed charge, which is essentially the right to be involved in the scheme, and that charge essentially is funded, and it's intended to return capital to the owners of the facility, Nelson City and Tasman District, and it charges a slight premium on the cost of capital so that they get a slight return to cover risk for doing that activity. So that's one aspect of the charging, and it's separate to what we consider the variable charges. And so those variable charges are when a contributor discharges wastewater down the drain, it has a certain volume and a certain load. Those elements cost us a certain amount of money to manage and to treat. And so that the variable charge on an annual basis, we zero out the charges at the end of the year. So we try and bill during the year equal to the cost. And at the end of the year, if we're up, we give some money back. If we're down, we ask the customers for some slightly more money to zero it out each year. So essentially, that's what Andrew's talking about. The fixed charges for the year, the pieces around the capital have been under recovering because of the way that the model has been doing, and that's been a consistent thing through the year. Whereas the variable charges initially at the start of the year were up. But then we've had the dry period, which is basically under recovered income during the last few months, which has driven our economics around the variable down. So that's essentially what the crux of the situation is. So
okay, that's fine, Philip. I see your hand up, so we'll let Philip ask the question. And I'm glad you've been briefed before this meeting, Philip. So that's one of the things we made sure of. I think 3 years ago, wasn't it, Andrew, to make sure the customers are informed.
I think we've been doing it a lot longer than that, but
I'm sure you have. Philip, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Through the chair, just want to ask in relation to the consultancy costs, which are significantly over budget by 283,000. How much of the consultancy costs actually are related to capital works, which shouldn't really come into operational costs? They should be capitalised and included in in the fixed costs for next year?
So through the chair, I looked at that in the previous month, and the April figures include some correction for some costs. So the 283 versus 282 is partly the same because there would have been some minor transmission of those movement of those costs across, and I think we moved $50,000 or something like that around. I can't remember the specific number off my head, which related to consents which we would capitalise in the future. There are a bunch of works that have been undertaken, such as the work towards designating the site, which is not a capital item, it's an operational item. So there are some other costs that have been accrued, which consultants have been, particularly the planning consultants, have been involved in, which aren't capitalised. And that's the advice that I've received, in their conversations from Andrew. So, sorry.
Well, we need to make sure that we're treating our customers fairly. That's the one thing I'd want to know, and it needs to be transparent, because I'm sure Philip will ask that question if we don't. That be fair comment, Philip?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Andrew, you need to make sure it's squeaky clean when we do the report, and I'm sure you can discuss it directly with Philip offline if we need to.
So in relation to that, it would be helpful to get some sort of breakdown as to where those the consultancy costs have the breakdown of what those consultancy costs are, and how you can justify that they are all operational rather than some of it capital.
Yeah. Are you able to provide that, Andrew? Or Nathan?
Through the chair, with a little help from my friends, namely Brad, I think, but no, between the three of us, we can do that. And rest assured, Philip, that we will be looking at this, reviewing it again before the year end. And it's in our interest, and always has been, to keep everything squeaky clean, to use your words, Kip. And we've got always have had an open book policy with our customers. So the model, the recovery, the data behind it is all available should they have any challenge or question. And I think Philip's request for a breakdown of the consultancy, given its quantum, is very reasonable. So that would be, that'll happen.
Yeah, through the chair, no issue with that at all. So.
All right, Philip, you've got a bit.
I have a supplementary question associated with that specific issue. And that is, what is the expectation for next year in terms of budgeting for that consultancy cost? Are you going to increase the budget, and what impact will that have on the new one, which is going to come in July?
It hasn't, well, through the chair, it hasn't been our practice to review the budget because of the constraints we have with the council budgeting process. So what I see happening in the new year, particularly around interest rates, is interest rates have dropped below what was budgeted, and this year we're under recovering the fixed on budget. I think in the new year that will reverse. Interest rates have moved significantly in the last 6 months and are above what we have budgeted for. So the fixed contribution is decided based on the interest rate applicable on the loans as at the 30th of June. So I haven't looked at the rate for yesterday, but I'm sure it's higher than what we had budgeted. So I would advise that we expect the fixed charges to be higher than budgeted for the new year. For the councils, that's not too much of an issue because they will pay more during the year as a fixed charge, but then they will get the back as net income. Whereas for the industry, that is not true.
Yeah, so that's what's the question I think Philip was going to ask.
No, the question was really about the contractor or consultancy payments associated with operational, because that was significantly blown out this year.
Yeah.
And what is the expectation on consultancy for this next year, and has that been incorporated into the budget? Or how will that be incorporated into our cost? Because it'll flow in one way or the other.
True.
Yeah.
Through the chair, when we did the budget, we had made an assumption that a small part of the year would be covered by consultants, and we were working on the recruitment strategy that was intended to cover some of the that cost. And we haven't achieved the target on terms of the recruitment. I'll take responsibility for that. Other things get in the way, but the intent was to take on additional staff to fill in some of the gaps rather than hiring consultants to do that work. The consultants will cost us 3 times the amount that the staff ourselves would use. So the answer, when we did the budgets, we had made the assumption that we would have staff on board by the end of this calendar year. I think I'd have to come back, confirm the specific assumptions we made. But at the moment we are well behind schedule on that. So there will be some impact on consultants in that respect. The other thing is that there have been additional, consultancy activities that weren't necessarily expected at the start of the year, and which have accrued. And so we are trying to rationalise what the specifics are. Some of those were thought to be necessary. Each time we do a project, as an example, we have to apply for a resource consent for the coastal overlay area now, whereas historically you didn't. If the site was designated, we get around that requirement. So we end up spending a lot of money each time we do any activity on a consent. Whereas if we go through the process and get a designation over the site for wastewater, that overrules that particular activity. So that was the reason we chose to spend additional money essentially on the designation works, which is contributing to the cost of consultants.
So Nathan, going forward, Philip's concern is have we budgeted for next year? But my understanding is your contractor is taking up some of that capacity within the contract.
That's more in terms of the delivery of the capital work. So this is specifically around operational charges that are not specifically related to capital works, that are costs that we incur. Things like the valuations on the assets, which is one, the activity engineering works that we're doing in terms of bringing our activity management database, up to a good standard. That there's also another piece that's incurring cost outside of the, that's an operational cost and not covered by capital. So that's where our consultants are supporting us in that. Are we going to continue? I think the answer is yes, Philip. There'll be an over budget in that next year for a part of the year, but the intent is that we would reduce that because of this engagement of staff internally that would support that.
All right. Okay. Well, we just need to keep them informed. All right. I've got Brian McGurk with us, Councillor McGurk, with your hand up.
Yeah thanks, Kat. Just a question on a line item in terms of the contract maintenance. We're tracking over, and it seems to be a very brief comment in the report itself that seems to be consistently around about 250,000 over, and at the moment we're going to be tracking to be over budget by the end of the year. Is there a bit more comment? I just listened to what you've just said about the consultancy costs.
Sorry, thank you, Brian. Through the chair, there were a couple of things that contributed to that overspend. One was when we took on the new contract, we bought spares off the contractor and brought them into our books. So essentially, we paid him for that those spares that he had on his books, because of the way the new contract works, they became ours, and we paid for them. So there's an element of an overspend in the contract there. There has been some reactive maintenance in the form of a major pump that I think failed. I'd have to go back and look at what all the different pieces are that have contributed to that. But at the present time, one of the things we're doing this year, right at the moment, is looking at securing the what we call the target outturn cost for next year, and that budgeted number was 2.1 million for all of that works, and the number that's come through from the consultant on that talk is 2.17 or something. So it's about within 3% of the overarching budgets that we were expecting. So we are pretty much bang on what we were expecting to have for our target outturn costs for the next year. So I'm reasonably comfortable that next year we are set up well. And one of our problems with our budgeting process is that I'm also working now on the 23-24 year. So by September, I need the draft business plan for the board for the 23-24 year. So we also have to project forward that extra for the 18 months forward for that as well. And there's not a lot of detailed data around this current contract framework yet to be able to do that, but we're going to make our best assessment of what we can for that draft budget in September. So do we expect this to go over? I don't. This is I think not a good reflection of next year's performance in terms of the operational costs. Brad,
right,
you might want to comment.
Yeah, through the chair, if I can make an addition there. What I'd like to point out is that in reality, the two lines below contract maintenance should also be taken into account in terms of the figure. One of the changes that has occurred with the new contract is that the actual cost for any particular part of this operation is now being charged to the cost centre that is incurring that cost, whereas previously we had a number of lump sum items. So the ongoing maintenance was in effect a lump sum item, and it was just apportioned based on a perceived split, for example, of where those costs at. So what we see now is actually we're incurring the costs against our coding based on what the actual costs are, rather than a percentage applied to a fixed number. The other thing to be wary of with the contract maintenance side of things, there is some work ongoing at the moment for the rising main from the concrete rising main from Monaco through to Bell Island, which is in addition to the O&M contract. So that's assessing the condition of that as an O&M item rather than a renewal item. And would have to, once that's done, the works to improve that pipeline would be a renewal. So there are some additional costs sitting in there as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I suppose if I look at just the line items, just the numbers in the line item, you're tracking pretty close to budget in those particular line items. So I'm just wondering where.
Yeah, that's where. It's just the case that now we're actually seeing the costs being incurred. The significant portion of that, anyway, we're seeing the cost actually being incurred where the costs are coming from on site, for example.
Okay, thanks.
Right, I've got a question probably of Brad or Nathan in terms of the low flow, and Andrew commented that when there's low flow, councils are paying less on a regular basis, as I understand it, because they're not contributing them. So a lower flow there would mean they'll pay less during those months, but then that impacts it at the end. So if there's high flow, they might pay more during the year and then they get a return. But if it's low flow, they'll pay less then, and then they don't get a return. Would that be a simplistic way of looking at it, Andrew?
Through the chair, I probably can answer that. The answer is yes. That is essentially how it works. It's not perfectly linear like that. So what happens is if the councils have a very low flow for due to dry weather, generally the industry's flows stay the same and their loads stay the same. So as a proportion of the overall flow for the year, the industries get slightly larger. So at the end of the year, if there was an under recovery, the industries would would end up paying more proportionally of the overarching aspect. In a wet year, that would be the opposite, and it would essentially be that the industries would be a lesser proportion, and they would pay less. So it's not fully linear, but it is generally in accordance with what you've said.
So we know why Philip does a rain dance every month then.
Well,
So
it's not quite like that, because we do have these different cost centers within it. For example, if we have low flows, we're using less electricity in the pump stations. And that cost savings then gets passed on based on flows. Whereas the electricity used, say, in the ATED would be weighted towards BOD requirement and the solids, where so and that's more related to load than it's quite a complicated model how it works out. And I blame Nathan for that, but it actually is a good model, and it's changed behaviours. It's actually achieved what it originally did. So well done, Mike.
Yeah, good. All right. Talit, you had a question? You're muted, Talit.
Sorry. Yeah, I have small question and recommendation through chair as well. We are talking, and I think it's a valid concern that we have to delineate between what is CapEx and what is OpEx. So on those lines, first of all, I have a question. Do we have a prescriptive process or guidelines as to what will be operational and what will be capital expenditure, and if we have we clearly communicated and included that into the O&M contract as well, so that we can encourage our O&M contractor every time if certain amount or scope increases from certain specified limit, then they can actually raise the minor capital works requests, these kind of things. So along the same lines, Brad was talking about the rising main concrete pipeline as well, and I suspect there should be some element which can be attributable to the capital works as well. For example, if the scope is just to condition assess, then that's fine. But if the scope is to condition assess and to provide the scope of the repairs, then there is an element which we can, attribute to the capital works. Thank you.
Nathan or Brad?
Through the chair, we have a process of understanding what CapEx and OpEx is. We have reasonable conversations, particularly with Andrew, about that, to test that we are right. There's always a little bit of a grey area, as you talk about, with the pipes like the rising main. I guess where we probably sitting at the present time on that concrete rising main is that we are doing works to understand what the scope would be at the present time. Right, we are investigating the pipe, and it's more currently about condition assessment to understand what, if any, remedial works or renewals works would be required. And for that reason, we have considered that current work to be operational. As soon as we get to the point where we say, yes, this pipe needs additional work to renew it, to extend its life, at that point, then it would become capitalized, and we'd be able to say that this work we're now incurring is to extend the life of that asset, and therefore will create more value in that asset, and therefore be capital. And so there's always going to be a little bit of a grey line, because the first stage of this project is actually an investigation, which there isn't a clear guidance on what that is. We may find that the pipe is actually in good condition. We may not. And the second stage of it will be most likely to be capitalised into the renewal side of that activity. So, Brad, you may choose to add further comment.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, through the chair. We do have a sort of 3 or 4 tier protection process in place when it comes to actually managing the costs that are received from the owning contractor. So there is a prescriptive process in the owning contract itself. Once the contractors submit their claim, prior to them submitting their claim, we have conversations around the activities and whether they are proactive, reactive, or renewal type capital type work. Once that claim is submitted to me, I then go through that claim as well and just make sure that the GL code is going to the right place. And quite often I will actually amend that in my claim to ensure that the costs are sitting in the right GL code for our finances.
Okay. All right. Now I think the next item is really the carryovers. If you just want to talk about when they will be available, Nathan. And then I'd just like to, I've got a question for Alec about location of meetings, because I don't know what other people's feelings are, but I hate doing these meetings over Zoom. And I know that there's a chamber in Richmond we could use if Nelson City is going to be out of, not be able to be used in September. So if you could think about that, Alec, well, you talk about carryovers, Nathan.
Yeah, so through the chair, my apologies. When we did the previous report, we were, in my mind, we have a 3-monthly report. We did it, and therefore it was going to sit in August, and I hadn't gone back and checked the specific date. And when I it's earlier, it's currently at the end of the 2 months, and it's like, actually, sorry, I just simply don't have the data available at the present time to do that report. So it requires us now to bring that to you in September with the September meeting. The September meeting will therefore be a fairly full agenda, because we'll have the draft the draft business plan, we'll have an annual report, we'll have this carryovers report, we'll have the general manager report. There's a bunch of stuff that's going to be, so it'll be a fairly busy agenda in that one. I just simply don't have the data available to provide that to you at the present time, and that's the reason we haven't got it. So my apologies for that.
Yep, that's fine. And I did think it was a short. So I just a question of Alec in relation to your chamber. Will it be available, do you think, in September? And is there logistical problems? Because we have had meetings in the Tasman chamber in the past, but I think Robin Shearer was providing the support at that time. So I certainly prefer in-person meetings, and it would be nice for Talent to be able to come to Nelson and attend in person, and we could take them on site. So what are your thinkings on that, Alec?
So through the chair, the issue with our chamber is not to do with the fact that it's not able to be used. It certainly is able to be used. And look, the issue at the moment is that we have resourcing and capacity issues within our governance advisors, and that's why we are choosing one over the other. I think we'd be quite happy to have the meetings face-to-face in the council chamber, provided that everybody that's sitting around you is able to attend those in person. We cannot have a hybrid system, unfortunately. So that places, it either has to be all on Zoom or it has to be all within the chamber, and our GAs can actually attend to either of those, but they cannot do a hybrid because the hybrid is too complex. We would prefer to stick here if we could, and if you do want to have that in face-to-face, that we stick in our council chamber with our staff. And I know that we have had it at TDC, but it does get messy, especially with capacity issues from our GAs, and we need to look after their welfare and their well-being. So if everybody can attend the next meeting face-to-face in the council chamber, then we're good to go, and our GAs can facilitate that, but we cannot do a hybrid situation, unfortunately.
All right, I can understand that. I was at a hybrid meeting yesterday, and it's messy, because I was sitting in Vancouver and there was others sitting in Wellington and then others in the chamber. So we could get an indication today, but if you could give an indication within the next week whether you would be able to attend. Is that fair enough? Do people think that's reasonable to attend? And what is people's preference? Mine certainly is to meet in person, and it might be the last meeting for Councillor Tufnell, so it would be nice to have it in person so we can actually give them a proper farewell.
And we can do a cup of tea and some cakes and stuff, but just bearing in mind that we will require anybody who attends in person to do a rat test.
Yeah.
So there are some requirements around it. I think this committee is small enough that we can space ourselves out and not have to sit at the table with masks, but you certainly will be required to rat test. And if you're ill or not well, if you've got symptoms, then even with flu, not to attend. So those are basic protocols.
Through the chair, if the rat test is on spot or we can do before we travel.
Before you travel would be absolutely fine, Natalia. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think I've got to do 2 in the next few days, having come into the country, and I had to do them before I left, 3 and a number overseas. So it's just the way we're living today. So are people happy with that there will be a requirement for a rat test? I'm getting nods around. Yeah. So Tim, you're happy with that too? Yeah, good. Well, I just seen it's going to be Councillor Tufnell's last meeting because he's told me he's not going to stand for re-election. I think he said all over Rover, to be correct.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So the indication is, and I'm sure the governance ladies are listening, seeing as they're recording everything, we will try and do the next meeting in person, but there are protocols, and if they could send those out that we know beforehand.
Yep. And I've been liaising with the GAs and we'll send those out. Yep. Good.
That'd be good.
All right. Well, I just think, particularly because it's Trevor's last meeting, that's quite important. Now,
thank you for that.
Yeah. Now, is there any other matters in Nathan's report that we haven't covered that someone has a question of? Otherwise, I'll be looking for a mover. No, I'm not seeing any. So Tim is moving that we receive his report. Have I got a seconder?
Yeah,
Trevor?
secondly.
Thank you. I'll put that then. All in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for that advice, Alec. It certainly would be better in person. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 2nd of September. And Philip, it would be good for you and I to just have a chat about that other issue offline before that meeting, because I don't want us to lose that opportunity with the changes that are coming. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's everything, is it not, Mr. Manager?
That's correct. There's no other items on the agenda.
And best of health to everybody for testing. I see that the COVID numbers in New Zealand are still creeping up and down. So it's just the nature of what we've got to live with. And the interesting thing was, where I was in Canada, their protocols are very similar to ours and quite strict. But I had 90% of them Americans on my cruise ship. And I don't think many of them wore a mask, and they certainly weren't testing. So the Americans and the Canadians are doing it quite differently. That's for sure. And I know, Brian, that's where you're heading next, isn't it?
Well, that's a plan. That's a plan.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I just thought I should let you know about that. So they certainly are different. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time, and thank you to all the staff for your work. And we'll see you in 2 months.
Do you need to call the meeting to a close, or?
At the end of the agenda, that's all we do. Is the meeting is closed. And we'll
Thank you very much.
And